Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another show of Inspirate, the show that helps you to enlighten yourself, the show that gives you hope, the show that is there to inspire you. The time is now to be inspired. Never before has the Ummah been required to be enlightened. Today we have a wonderful topic, a topic that is very relevant. As you know, we're all involved in some way or other in business, in organizations, and even a family is an organization. And what is very important is, are these organizations, are the family units operating in a productive way? Is it operating in a harmonious way? Is it operating in a way that is cohesive? And what a critical component of this cohesiveness, of this productivity, is what is called emotional intelligence. So let's get into the depths of this topic. What is emotional intelligence? Idris?
Oh. MashaAllah, you are excellent there.
Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. The idea of emotional intelligence has become common currency in the recent past. It was something that has been neglected. In fact, people are saying EQ is worth twice IQ. Now, emotional intelligence is...
Sorry, can I just ask you, what is IQ?
Intelligence quotient.
Right, okay.
Now, what has happened is this, that in this day and age, a critical thing is this, that we need to be smart about our emotions. The fact that as individuals, you go through a whole range of emotions. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is how you deal with it in terms of yourself and also the emotions of others. And once you're able to deal with it, to self-regulate it and understand the emotions of others, you'll find, as you said so beautifully in your preamble, you'll have harmonious relationships. It's about being smart about your emotions and the emotions of people around you.
Okay, so you make a very good point, right? You're saying, firstly, emotional intelligence is a precursor to intellectual, the intellectual quotient.
Yeah.
Now, traditionally, if you went to school, you'd write an exam, an IQ, which was famous, right? And that was a determinant of success. Mohammed, what do you have to say about that?
So I think that, as Idris says, people have become much more aware of emotional intelligence. And the simplest way that is usually explained is it's about how you react to others by understanding yourself. But what I'd like to do is add a little more to that. Because most people will say they can do this. They know how to regulate themselves, they know how to speak to others. But I like that word, regulate. I think it's almost creating a filter in your brain that filters what comes in and filters what goes out in a way that's controlled. So that filter means, often people harm themselves in business, in personal relationships when they react very impulsively. And when they act impulsively, you actually haven't thought through it. You haven't filtered what's come in, and you haven't filtered what's gone out. So to me, I think we've seen it, I've been in business a while, and what I've seen in environments where they get quite charged. I used to be in investment banking, and people there, the stress levels are very high. And that's actually, funnily enough, where you find a lot of low EQ. And the most intelligent people react in the worst possible ways. And so, I've said to someone the other day, actually I wrote it on LinkedIn, I've seen in my years of meetings with CEOs of listed companies and the like, I've seen people who have the highest IQs who are the most pathetic at their jobs. And I've seen people who are excellent at their jobs, and it's not an IQ thing, actually it's an EQ thing. And the final point I would make on that is, because you're filtering, you can learn this. It's not something you're born with. IQ you might be born with, but EQ you can learn.
That's actually a very, very good point. One would think that if you don't have it, then it's difficult to actually nurture it. Zia, welcome. There's interesting conversations that are taking place. What's your view on emotional intelligence? And specifically, we're talking about it in the workplace, in the family unit. So how would you, add to the topic?
So just speaking to what Mohammed was saying, where it's something that you're not necessarily born with, it's something that you learn. And I heard an interesting story a while back that the thing that you react with to something, so say something happens, an experience, and your first reaction isn't necessarily what should be then. It's just what you've been conditioned to feel or to behave. And then you take a step back and really understand what's really going on before you respond. And that's where I think it also links back to the need for an intention or a niyyah before you do anything. Having that niyyah is a big sign of emotional intelligence, and something that we're taught quite a lot in Islamic principles and teachings, that you must always begin with a niyyah, or else the value of your action isn't as good as if you did it without thinking. And for me, that's a major part of emotional intelligence, and something that I believe, in my experience, makes a big difference as well, both in the workplace and the family life.
You know, just an idea. People ask me, they say to me, we've never seen you ever angry.
Yeah.
I said, I get angry, but how do I convey my anger? I'll tell my wife if I'm upset with her, very rarely, I love you, my darling, my shusha bablina. I say to her, darling, I'm angry. I don't have to shout my anger. I don't have to scream my anger. The whole idea, and it's so important, you know, so important. Our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the most eloquent ambassador when it came to the EQ. And you know, it's about being self-aware, that when you are speaking, you never say you don't get to the point of anger. You know you're going in that direction. You regulate yourself, right? And there are so many beautiful qualities of people of high IQ, which you can discuss perhaps in the next segment. You can disagree, but you don't have to be disagreeable. Yeah. You're able to check your tone. You're able to look at the social context. You understand the other. You also understand that every human being is a unique human being, that it's not a unidimensional approach. And in that way, as you said in your preamble, it will create a far more harmonious society, a community that is able to have conversations, a community in which it's no harm. You don't agree with me, it's okay. It doesn't affect my ego. So it's about those things, and it's really, it's not so complex, and we can talk about it further, you know.
If I can add to that, I mean, you know, what you're saying is true, because EQ is also not withholding your emotion.
Correct.
If you stay angry and you don't show your anger in a reasonable way, people don't know how you're feeling. And if they don't know how you're feeling, this anger will collect and come out in an unacceptable way at some point. So the idea of high EQ and building up a high EQ is actually, what do I do with this anger? It's a positivity rather than a negativity. And what is anger? Anger is a discomfort. What do you do with that discomfort to make it work for you? You tell people how you feel and you say, how will we resolve this? And so I think that's another thing. In the workplace, it's actually even harder than in the home, because often you're thrown into a building, if you're working in a corporate, with hundreds of people you possibly normally never would even be friends with, because they're not similar to you. And it's very difficult if you don't understand yourself well enough to know what pushes your buttons. And if you know what pushes your buttons, you can make other people aware of that. And that then allows them to relate to you in a way which is specific to you, in the same way as you treat people individually.
Now, those are excellent points, Mohammed. I think you're talking about filter at one element. You're also talking about being able to express yourself as well, but doing it in a circumspect way. And I think that's the point. What we're getting out of the first part in terms of breaking down the topic of emotional intelligence, and specifically in your family units in the workplace, is that emotions are raw. You have to be circumspect in terms of how they're expressed. At the same time, you can't be thwarting that emotions. Emotions are a critical component. It's also, and a very good point that was brought up, was that you need to become aware of who you are. What are those that are your strengths, and what are those that are your weaknesses? So, I think that was a great start on the topic. Let's get into more depths. I'm going to be interrogating you guys much more, and we get into why is emotional intelligence so important after the break.
Time is now. Time is now.
Welcome back to Inspirate and the topic emotional intelligence in the workplace. We've had a wonderful first segment. We spoke about filters. We spoke about what emotional intelligence is versus your intelligence IQ. And now let's get into a little bit more depth. When it comes to emotional intelligence, right, what are the attributes of somebody that is in a higher state of emotional intelligence?
You know, Yusuf, one of the most intriguing, one of the most beautiful qualities of a person that has high emotional intelligence. Let's look at a marriage situation. A couple had the disagreement, they get into some fight or whatever. You find that the couples are able to isolate that incident. Mm-hmm. It doesn't affect the overall happiness in the marriage. They do not suffer from what you call emotional meltdown. They're able to discuss it objectively, being grateful for the happy marriage, but able to isolate that, right? And it's a very important thing, because one of the things about people with high emotional intelligence, they are self-motivated. Their happiness is not dependent on the other, as it were. They are able to deal with differences. They're able to unleash the potential. They understand social environments. And it's not about them. The beautiful part of a person with high emotional intelligence, we spoke about being self-aware and also self-regulating. For example, he says, hey, I can see my tone is affecting my wife. I can see it. So before he unleashes that complete tone, as it were, that will have a profound negative impact, is able to regulate it, knowing that. And then, as you also said, and when you find that, hey, there's something amiss. For example, people with high emotional intelligence can walk into a room, can go into the home and look at the wife and say something is amiss. You're able to read people, because your emotions, no matter how much you try to suppress it, they are manifested in behavior. You understand the other. And what it does, essentially, you become a person that listens with your heart and with empathy. And then the other person feels better, because psychologists say revealing is healing.
That's powerful. And I think that point that you make of empathy, right, where you're caring about the next person. But to be able to do that, you have to be in that state of you knowing yourself. You need to be in control of your emotions. Zia?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think respect and empathy is definitely a starting point for displaying high emotional intelligence. And the need for that love and that respect is really important, as well as having some ambition and understanding that there's a longer game at play, no matter what you're doing. Like a basic analogy for me would be a Formula One driver. So he drives his car, he can drive it really fast and take the corners really sharply and so on, but his tires wouldn't last the whole race. So he's got to think about, whenever he's doing, there's always an objective in mind. There's a lot of people with IQ, with technical ability involved, and if you burn those bridges or you make things difficult for those people through bad emotional responses or bad understanding of where they're coming from, you wouldn't be able to tackle the next project or the next thing or task that you're trying to accomplish. So definitely having the long game in mind is something that you've got to be aware of as an emotionally intelligent individual.
Clearly your motor car analogy, I think you're probably into fast cars and and you are circumspect in your emotions with regards to that, right? Yeah. Look, let's get into the workplace, right? I know, Mohammed, you're very strong in terms of the workplace. You've had a long history in working environments, in corporates, having started up some amazing projects as well. In the workplace, right, what would be the typical attributes that you would think that would make a team? I mean, the big thing we talk about is teamwork, right? So what would be those attributes that would make a team successful?
So the first thing I think people often forget is there's a vocabulary for emotional intelligence.
Very important.
That's powerful.
And so, the vocabulary of emotional intelligence is be careful what you say and be careful of how you absorb what others say. That's the vocabulary. So that's part of knowing yourself, what words describe you. What words describe you in a team environment. But it's also equally important to highlight, especially in work environments, of what's not EQ.
And people often think I must be brash and aggressive, particularly in banking environments and in finance and in corporates. There's this perception that the stronger and the more aggressive you are. I mean, look at Steinhoff. I knew the CEO very well over a number of years, and I can tell you that didn't work. It works by an iron fist, but people don't like you. People don't like you when you're in a room. There's a negativity about you. So one of the things, as Idris said, is very important is in terms of the attributes, the self-regulation is also about not losing your cool. Before you lose your cool, keep your cool and absorb it and say, what does this mean? What's the best way to react to that? And often people think this wastes time, but once you've learned the skill, it actually speeds it up. Because you're absorbing very quickly. You're absorbing what's going on around you very quickly. And once you do that, when people react to you angrily, you calmer than them. You actually beat the one that's fighting with you, if that is what you're doing. And in a negotiation as well, he who stays calm wins the game.
Yes.
So, whether you're working in a team context, whether you're working in order to negotiate something, or whether you're working in an environment where you're trying to convince people, that vocabulary is very important.
I want to just challenge you on that one, right? I want to just bring up that point because I think this is the question that we're asking from a leadership perspective. So we're saying emotional intelligence is very important. Now, there's different types of leadership. You get certain leaders, and you've seen that more prevalent in the world today. The leader of the Western world. Would you regard Donald Trump as an emotionally strong person? Because you talked of somebody being brash, you talked of somebody being, a little bit more harsher. Would you regard that type of leader being somebody that is emotionally strong? I'm just posing that,
You see, the critical thing about people with high emotional intelligence, one of the abiding qualities they have is one of humility. It's not about them. The ability to unleash other people's potential. They have a sense of maturity. They would not impulsively, the word impulse is not part of the vocabulary. They do things intuitively. They understand before something goes out, what will be the impact of this. And you find that they are far more circumspect in terms of how they speak, the messages they send. And I'll give you an example. I like to believe, Alhamdulillah, I have high emotional intelligence. Why am I saying that?
Good for you, Uncle.
Yeah, I like to believe. Not the highest, but we're getting there, right?
And I love your humility as well. Yes.
I'm the most humble guy you'll ever meet. For example, I know I'm part of lots of WhatsApp groups. And I know sometimes in the groups, the passions are heightened regarding a sensitive issue. Whether you're on the left or on the right, you never write. You get that reaction. So what I do, I only say in my WhatsApp groups, Ameen or Inna Lillahi wa Inna Rajiun.
Yes.
I do not, because I understand other people. The critical thing is this, people that are highly emotionally intelligent, they take charge of what's under their control. That's the bottom line.
I would like to add to that. You asked about one of the leaders in the world. One of the key attributes of people with high emotional intelligence is accepting responsibility for your words, your actions, and your behavior. So if you're wrong, you're able to say, I was wrong about this, and I accept your view, or I don't agree with what I did, but let's find another view. The other thing as well is that you mustn't mistake personality and emotional intelligence. Personality...
Mohammed, I'm just going to stop you there. We need to take a break. Let's get into the personality versus emotional intelligence. In our next segment, we've got a lot to look forward to still. There's great discussions that have taken place. The important thing, we spoke about empathy, and let's get into the personality versus emotional intelligence in our next segment. We'll see you after the break.
Time is now. Time is now.
And we at Inspirate are back talking on a very important topic, the topic of emotional intelligence in the workplace. We've ascertained how important emotional intelligence is. Just before the break, we were on a topic of emotional intelligence versus personality. And I was absolutely intrigued by that. Mohammed, if you can just elaborate a little bit more on that.
So I think that's, thanks, Yusuf. I think it's very important to differentiate that. And the reason for that is personality is like IQ. It's something that's embedded and remains with you forever. You can't really change it. If you're an introvert, you like quiet. You're an extrovert, you're an extrovert. But emotional intelligence can be changed. So personality, you can be a quiet person with high emotional intelligence, and you can be a loud person with high emotional intelligence. It doesn't preclude any of the above. But personality is how you project yourself, how others perceive you. Emotional intelligence is how you use that personality effectively. So whether you're loud or soft, whether you're extrovert or introvert, that's your personality. Emotional intelligence is how do I use that in an environment with other people, and how do I use it to influence people, for people to influence me in an appropriate manner, and for us to come to solutions, for example, in the workplace. And why I like to differentiate that is because there's often this perception, and I've seen it in corporates all the time, particularly younger people that come into the business world, who think I have to be loud, otherwise they won't hear my ideas. Even entrepreneurs, you know, I need to scream quite loud, nobody will hear me. The truth of the matter is not about that. It's about how you use your emotional intelligence to get that idea across, even if it's softly.
You're talking about the youth, and I know, Zia, you're very much involved with the youth. I know you have an organization that is a networking organization of young entrepreneurs or those with ideas that come and you match them with the right investment or assistance and so on, inspiring them as well. Now, with the youth, and we're also talking of nature versus nurture. I know I did pick up somewhere that in your first 13 years of your life, a lot of your emotional intelligence is cemented. Although we are saying also that you can nurture it and it can evolve. So what is your experience dealing with the youth in terms of this emotional intelligence?
Yeah, so I think going back to what you were saying earlier, Idris, about being in many WhatsApp groups, never before has it become so easy or so proliferated that so many different points of view are coming onto your radar, whether it's through social media, through WhatsApp, and through the workplace. I know from my own experience, I get to deal with people from multiple backgrounds, from multiple countries as well, that have different 13 years affecting their makeup. And for me, the biggest value add, or the way to navigate that, is to understand what that goal is that you're trying to achieve and who's best placed to help you. Because it's not always about being able to rein in your frustrations or your anger, but actually making sure that you make the right decisions to get the job done in the most efficient way. And I think young people are probably going to be faced with this a lot more than they were in previous generations, because of this massive influx of different ideas coming around. And yeah, it's a difficult place to be as a young person, but it's something that it can be worked on. There's a lot of places that you can learn from and people that you can learn from.
In fact, whilst you're talking, this point struck me, right? Is that when you have a high EQ, you will invite feedback. You will not take it personally, because you want to grow, you see? And because you are a self-motivated guy, you'll ask the guy, tell me, man, you came for the program, what were your feelings? And you will not take anything personally. No matter, even though his tone might be harsh, you look at it and say, hey, yeah, he's right, you know? Thank you so much. So in other words, you are not consumed by it and preoccupied by it. And that's what happens, become like a fixation. You find that people with high emotional intelligence do not have road rage, for example. They do not have extremes in behavior, because they realize that their words can either heal or they hurt. I'd rather use purring words than snarling words. It's never about their ego. It's always about us. It's not about scoring points. It's a very important aspect in relationship dynamics. And when you're talking to the youth today, what is the biggest complaint? Adults chastise us, lecture us, but we also got a voice. And therefore, a person with a high EQ realizes that he does not have the monopoly of knowledge. Even a young person in his innocence, in his naivety, may have a perspective on life that I can learn from. So it is about having those healthy conversations, you know.
Yeah, no, I think when we look at also organizations, and I mean, you guys are bringing a lot of powerful points, poignant points. But if you look at an organization, you have, let's take two teams, and you have one team that's operating with a lot of negativity, there's a lot of backbiting, mistrust, and that results anger, that results in lower productivity. And you have another team that's operating so harmoniously, they're all in tune, it's almost like an orchestra, right? Would you say, because I'm trying to understand, are we saying that emotional intelligence is one of the most important components that differentiates that two scenarios?
I would say yes. And again, you know, I've seen this in business where you'll see exactly what you're talking about. But you'll also find in that team that appears to have a higher average emotional intelligence, that there'll be radical honesty and transparency. You can't be emotionally intelligent if you don't believe in radical honesty, what your point earlier. So someone makes a criticism, it stings. I mean, it's not good when someone says, I don't like what you said, I don't agree with you. But high emotional intelligence is about taking that sting and saying, where did it come from and how do I use it? It came from a good place. I can use it by saying, actually, you're right. Let's think about this differently. What if we take my idea and your idea and find a better solution? Or maybe, actually, I didn't think about it that way. You're absolutely right. So I think you have to acknowledge if it stings, because otherwise it builds up as anger in yourself. But all of that is premised on radical truthfulness. And it starts in teams, but it starts with you, radical truthfulness with yourself. You know, what am I? What am I weak at? What am I strong at? So when someone levels that criticism, the sting is there, but you say, actually, I know I'm weak in that spot. This person is right.
In fact, you know, I never thought it about this way. I never said this before, and I'm just saying it now. The whole idea from what you were saying, right, about emotional intelligence, you'll find people that are highly emotional intelligent, they do not have a victim mentality.
Yes, that's very important.
Very important. Secondly, they are solution driven, they are creative. Because in any situation, as you said, you know, we are human.
Correct.
The sting will be there. It can be hurtful. Sometimes some people can be offensive. But you deal with it. And in the end, you don't allow it to consume you, permeate you. Don't let them crawl underneath your skin. You deal with it. And you say, what lessons have I learned? And you're always looking for solution, bringing people together. It's never about my ego, me, myself, I. You're not a megalomaniac, you know?
Correct, yeah.
And that's the important thing.
You made a very good point. I think we're talking that it's about moving away, and this is so important, this moving away from the ego.
Yeah.
The ego may be an important component, but it's not about me, it's about I. That's what makes brilliant teamwork.
Yes.
That's what makes for more harmonious relationships in the home, which also permeates into the workplace. And importantly, I love this. I love that point of radical truthfulness,
Very powerful.
radical honesty. Word of radical economic transformation, but this is our new one. And this is actually what we need, right? And becoming immune to the criticism. Hearing, understanding that it's coming from a good space and learning from it, but not getting impacted by criticism. That is what makes somebody an emotionally stronger person. We'll listen to the panelists and their closing remarks in the last segment, after the break.
Time is now. Time is now.
Like all our shows, time really passes by so quickly when we get into an important topic like emotional intelligence. I've thoroughly enjoyed the topic. There's some pearls of wisdom that has been shared. And in these last few minutes, let's get down to, as somebody sitting out there, listening to this here, right? How would I, sitting out as a viewer, right, listening to this, say, how can I better my emotional intelligence? Mohammed?
So I think I want to, if I can explain that through a particular situation that we're all facing, but The first answer that I would have to that, or one of them, would be firstly mindfulness. You have to be mindful about yourself, about the environment, about the things impacting you and the people around you. The second part of that is thinking around that, and honestly and radically honestly thinking about that environment, and that mindfulness is almost a meditation of thoughts. What that will then allow you to do is better react to situations. So it takes some time out on the side somewhere, think about it before you react to it. And this is very important in the South African context where everybody is so negative about the politics and what we've been through. And often you, in whether you're at braais or weddings or wherever you are and people are having conversations, it goes in a circular reference. And it creates more negative toxicity. And I often listen to these and think, you know, this will carry on forever and get nobody anywhere other than depression. What you have to say about that is what is in my control and influence, what is not, and what's the opportunity. Even in bad situations, there's opportunity. So we need to think in terms of opportunity, not negative toxicity. And that requires mindfulness and honesty.
You know, what you're saying about mindfulness is so important, that sometimes in life you meet someone and you ask the person, how was your day? He said, well, you know, this morning this one driver upset me, man. And the whole day is impacted on you, the whole day. Now you got to understand there's something radically wrong there, number one, right? The critical thing in the end is this: a person that has a high EQ will never blame anyone else for his situation. He takes full responsibility. And I recall this one incident that was, for me, a tipping point in my life. I remember that when I was a teacher at a particular school, and the headmaster and the acting head of department, he felt a bit insecure. Whether it's my good looks or not, I don't know what it was. I think, right, my good looks and all that. Darling, see, I'm good looks. So anyway.
Maybe you're dressing.
My dressing. So anyway, they made my experience a very torrid one for a few days. And I was staying on my own, and I went, and I was quite emotional. I went to see my mentor, and he said to me, why are you suffering for other people's inadequacies? Then a friend of mine shared a story which his father shared, and it is so ironical that a good few months later I saw that article in the Reader's Digest, and for me it's a tipping point. It's about this one person who goes to the shop every day of his life, and he greets the person, the shop owner. Good morning, sir. May I have the newspaper, please? Thank you. Every day, and he buys the paper. His friend accompanied him for about 2 or 3 days. His friend said to him, you know, you are mad. How can you support that person? You go every day to him. You greet him so politely. He doesn't smile back. He's so sullen, yet you are so good to him. His answer was something that changed lots of things in my relationship with people, be it subordinates or superordinates. He said, that man mustn't tell me how I should behave towards him. And that's the way of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Right? Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, do good to those who harm you, forgive those who hurt you. But we get so upset, so agitated, and the way we react. And I know, end this part off with one important thing. The thing is, you may ask, you asked this in the break, why is it people get so angry? And you know why? Because all of them are suffering from what you call post-traumatic stress. They've gone through life, perhaps in a home where the emotions were suppressed, didn't have a chance of ventilating it. As they grow up, it unleashes. So it's easy to deal with, you know.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's a combination of having that mindfulness and empathy, and recognizing other people's humanity. Understanding that everyone's here, they've got the same, regardless of their race, religion, background, education, etc. They all want to be happy and do good for themselves, their families, and others. And if you can recognize that and let go of that post-traumatic stress and not have this long memory of bad things, you'd be able to learn and think from their perspective, regardless whatever situation you find yourself in, and that'll allow you to react as well, knowing that there's a greater objective that everyone wants to achieve, and that's, you know, true happiness here in this world and in the akhirah.
I think we're speaking a lot about caring.
Yes.
That has come across very strongly of somebody that is emotionally strong, who has a high emotional IQ, is somebody that's caring, that's empathetic, somebody that's aware, that radical honesty, somebody that's aware of who they are as an individual, know their strong points, know their weak points, and because of that, they are able to deal with people in an empathetic way. And where there's differences, and let's be honest, there's a lot of differences. In the world we're living in today, it's become an absolute diverse world. It's no more as homogeneous as it was. You look at it even in our own communities, there are major challenges. But it's about understanding that there are differences, but at the end of the day, we are one as humanity.
In fact, Yusuf, the critical thing in all of this, the topic is emotional intelligence in the workplace. And if we can have this, it's about being present. A person with a high EQ is present.
Correct.
When you speak to him, he connects with you. His mind is not cluttered. He says to you, you're important, I affirm you. Many people complain. Up to 68 to 80% of people working in any company leave the company because of the relationship with the immediate manager. And what is the complaint? The manager is not present, is insensitive, as it were. And what it really does, the long and short of it all, there are a few basic things all of us can do. Number one, to self-reflect and ask yourself, how are my relationships with people, with my family, with my children, and in the workplace? How am I perceived? Are you getting feedback from others? Feedback maybe from people higher up, and even collegial feedback. And you start that process. In the end, the success anywhere, in any institution, in any company, even in terms of the home, is about relationship dynamics, how you manage relationships.
If I can add one thing to that, the one thing we haven't discussed is flexibility.
It's true.
And if you're not a flexible person, you can walk into a meeting or into a discussion or into an environment which is a gathering with family or with business associates, and you have a set mindset about what's about to transpire. And inevitably, as you mentioned, people are very different. People perceive things differently, and it doesn't go your direction. If you're inflexible, it will create tension within yourself. And if it creates tension within yourself, you don't know how to deal with it. And that results in bad consequences, i.e. low emotional intelligence. And so to deal with it, if you accept and you make yourself, one of your questions earlier was, how do we practice on this? Become a flexible person to other people's ideas.
Thank you. Okay, so that's the topic on emotional intelligence. My dear brothers and sisters, I trust that you thoroughly enjoyed it. The little boys and girls that are also watching, that are aspirant and want to be successful, we understand that emotional intelligence is one of the most critical components for harmony in the world. We are living in a world where there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of chaos, and a lot of it is because of emotions that are not in circumspect. It's because of people, leaders that are not exercising emotional intelligence of a higher order. If we can get this, and there are numerous examples of those that have led before us that have brought emotional intelligence. If we can use those examples in our life, we can live a better, emotionally intelligent life, and so make this world a better place. This is Yusuf Dinda thanking you for another show of Inspirate, and hope to see you on many of our other shows again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.